There's a story told by Parker Palmer in one of his books about an experience probably we've all shared. He was a passenger on a plane which, as it pulled away from the gate, taxied far, and then at the far corner of the airport just stopped, and he could hear the engines wind down as his heart sank. The pilot came over the public address system and said, "I have some bad news and some really bad news. The bad news is there's a storm front in the west and Denver is socked in. And we've looked for alternatives, but there are none. So we'll be staying here for a few hours. That's the bad news. The really bad news," he continued, "is that we have no food on board and it's lunchtime." Everybody groaned, as you can imagine, and some of the passengers, believe it or not, started to complain and became angry. But then Palmer watched as one of the flight attendants did something remarkable. She stood up and took the intercom and said, "We're really sorry. We didn't plan it this way, folks, and we really can't do much about it. I know for some of you this is a big deal. You're really hungry, or you have a medical condition and need lunch. And some of you might not care one way or the other, and some of you need to skip lunch." All right, you're paying attention, that's good. All right. So she continues and she says, "I'm going to pass around 2 bread baskets and ask everybody to put something into the basket." She said, "I know some of you brought snacks, something to tide you over. Some of you have lifesavers or chewing gum or Rolaids. And if you don't have anything edible, you certainly have a picture of your children or your boyfriend or your spouse or even a business card. And everybody put something in, and then we'll reverse the process," she said. "We'll pass the basket around again, and everyone can take out something that he or she needs." And what happened next, Palmer said, was amazing. The griping stopped. People started to root around in pockets and handbags. Some of them went up into the luggage racks. They were able to pull out boxes of candy, a salami, a bottle of wine, and then the people were laughing and talking to each other. And what she did was transformed a group of people who were focused on need and deprivation into a community of sharing. A world of scarcity had become a world of abundance. She, the flight attendant, did what Jesus did in the gospel today, what Jesus continues to do every day of our lives. It is Jesus who makes a world of scarcity become a world of abundance. And even in these days of separation and isolation, there is still an abundance that comes from our shared faith as a parish community, a shared commitment to reaching out to those who are poor and to those who are in need. A generous spirit is alive and well for those who are here in person and those who continue to stay connected to us through live streaming and the virtual world. And I am very, very much aware that this is a time of scarcity for many, a time of loneliness, a time of need, socially, spiritually, and yes, financially. But can you hear the thread that runs through the scriptures today to invite us to look at the power of God's generosity even in the midst of scarcity? You who have no money, come. Why spend your money, your wages, for what will not satisfy? The hand of the Lord feeds us, and what will separate us from the love of God and the gospel? You feed them yourselves. We've been looking at 5 concrete ways that we can grow as disciples. And I've talked about being more engaged through small groups, through service, the call from our baptism. I've talked about sharing and inviting people into the faith community. I've talked about practice. Did you notice I haven't said a word about tithing? This Sunday, though, lends itself to the concept of tithing. And I'm afraid that this might offend some of you. So therefore, I want to start with this disclaimer outright. Your gift of time, talent, and treasure are the gifts that many already give and continue to give to this community. So let's be clear. I am not only talking about money when I talk about tithing. And in fact, I have said repeatedly, over and over and over again, your financial giving is overwhelming, amazing. This is not about asking you for money. This is about asking you to think about how tithing could invite all of us to be better disciples, to be more connected to Jesus, to this parish community, and the greater world. We here at St. Norbert's say we are a community of disciples. And regardless of how we find ourselves these days, we are all called to be generous. Isn't it amazing that the poor are so often very generous, giving from their need? Maybe it has something to do with assurance and generosity going together. Some will claim that we cannot get discipleship right unless and until we get the money part right. We have to grow, they'll say, to see our money and our possessions as gifts from God. We must grow our trust in God more for the giver than for the gifts. And then we have to use the gifts to honor and worship the server. And the only way to do that is by giving. And that's why tithing and giving, we think here at St. Norbert's, is a critical step, a key to real discipleship. And whatever you give, it is the giving of time and treasure and talent. And in months and months, I hope not too soon, we'll talk about particular ways to make tithing a priority, to make it a percentage, to make it planned. But I don't want to do that yet. I just want to encourage us to think about all of the gifts that God has given to us, the abundance, even in this scarce time. And is it possible, giving to God in my place of worship as an act of worship, and giving to the poor could open up my heart to authentic worship and to help me grow my faith right. Let me be clear. Tithing is about giving our gifts away because we acknowledge that God is the ultimate giver. And to follow Jesus, we're called to become more generous givers. Why we give? It draws us closer to God. It helps grow our character. And finally, I think it helps us to express our love for others. It helps the parish to reach out to the community. Can I ask you this week to think of yourself stuck on that airplane with bad news and really bad news? And ask yourselves, as I'll do the same, what is the bad news of my life? And what is the really bad news? And could we begin to consider, even with all the bad news, God's generosity, God's abundance is there for us? And of course, I want you to consider what I'm saying about tithing. But I think there are other steps to get there. Maybe consider starting a gratitude journal. You know how we go to bed at night and sometimes we do an examine of all the things we've done wrong? Maybe stop and think of how generous you've been that day. How much gratitude you have in your heart for how much God loves you. What is one small step that you can do this week coming to make this tithing thing more real for you? What are the loaves and the fishes that you have to give generously from out of the blessings? Maybe it could be as simple as giving attention to another person, and that could be a form of generously giving as well. Look at the abundance that God gives us at this table. Look at the abundance of Jesus pouring himself out and breaking himself open for us to be fed and nourished. May our sharing as a community in the communion of Jesus' presence help us to be grateful for all of the abundance we have in these times of scarcity and isolation. And might we be willing to give from our need of time, of talent, and yes, even our treasure.